One fight that I'm interested in that not many people are talking about for 2026 is Gervonta Davis and Floyd Schofield Jr. I feel like it make all the sense in the world, especially for Tank Davis and the Floyd Schofield team. Floyd Schofield Sr., he's always showed his willingness to let that O go for a little bit of dough. And I feel like it'll make sense against a guy like Gervonta Tank Davis. Possibly your night could end early, get a nice payday, and then post interviews after the fight, you just say you got beat by a great, and it doesn't look as bad as getting in there and losing to a guy like Abdullah Mason or a guy like Murataya. You're losing to a generational talent, and it won't hurt your chances of getting fights going forward, especially if you do good in the fight. I feel like Tank is always looking for guys that he has the upper hand on, and Floyd Schofield being green, not being as active, and not having the most, not having the highest level of competition on his resume, I feel like that all plays into Tank Davis' favor. In Tank Davis' defense, you beat a young up-and-coming guy, an up-and-coming guy that got a lot of momentum right now. Similar how Haney beat Brian Norman Jr. Coming into that fight, Brian Norman Jr. had a lot of momentum, and once Devin Haney got that victory, all the momentum went with him. So I could see the same thing for Tank versus Schofield. Schofield, again, I'm not saying he going to go in there and he just going to be fooled. He going to be able to fight back. Floyd Schofield is getting better. Say what you want about Floyd Schofield, but he can fight his fight. And as long as he could keep it a close distance fight, stay aggressive, look to keep pushing Tank back and staying in his face, I feel like it could be a competitive fight. Ultimately, I would have Tank Davis winning that fight only because of his experience, his IQ. He's been in the ring for a long time with a lot of good guys. But, this type of matchup can be fireworks, especially if he could go in there and do what Isaac Cruz wasn't able to do. And that's close the gap, exchange shots in between, and land those hard punches. And Floyd Schofield has the youth. He has the youth to catch up to a guy like Tank Davis. He's not the most active, but he's been active enough to know how to get things done in there, especially when it pertains to, catching up to Tank, landing hard shots, and getting up out of there. I feel like Gervonta Tank Davis can benefit from a fight like this all around the board. Like I said before, you beat a guy like Floyd Schofield, you back in the headlines. It's not like you beat a guy like Abdullah Mason, you fought for a belt or something like that. But, you beat an up-and-coming guy who had a lot of promise. That says something about, that starts your year off phenomenally. I'm sure a kid wouldn't mind that fight. It's an opportunity to prove himself against a B-level, A-level type of fighter. But that's a fight I would be interested in for 2026 for Gervonta Davis, especially if we can't get a guy like Shacky Foster, Abdullah Mason, Andy Cruz, Murataya. I think Floyd Schofield would be a great test of where Gervonta Davis is right now with the crop of fighters that's out right now.